All right, well, while we're waiting for the rest of folks to come on in here, why don't we go ahead and get started? It's a little after 1 o'clock, so I'm going to open us up in prayer, and then we'll get into things. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, we thank you for this beautiful day, for the sunshine, for the warmth, for it being the first day of the week where we can set aside our labors and come before you and worship in song and prayer and hearing your word preached. And as we now look specifically at singing psalms, we ask that you would grant us understanding, grant us joy as we consider how we can return praise to you in this way, and grant that we would come away from this place with a greater understanding of you and of your word and of how we can return praise to you. Lord, we ask these things in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. All right. I'm going to begin by reading a portion of Psalm 33, just very brief, verses 1 through 5. So hear God's word. Rejoice in the Lord, O you righteous, for praise from the upright is beautiful. Praise the Lord with the harp. Make melody to him with an instrument of 10 strings. Sing to him a new song. Play skillfully with a shout of joy. For the word of the Lord is right, and all his work is done in truth. He loves righteousness and justice. The earth is full of the goodness of the Lord. So the one thing I'll draw attention to here as we open up is verse 3, where it says, play skillfully. We are called in our praise to be skillful. Now, does that mean that if you are not musically trained, you are not invited to participate in song in God's house? It's a bit of a rhetorical question. The answer is obviously no. So, okay. So we're called to play. So the words of the psalm are to play skillfully. This was in reference to instruments, which were used in the Old Testament. The instruments we use as New Testament worshipers are the strings of our heart, right? Making melody with our hearts. So that is a reference to the song. The Psalms also say in Psalm 100 to make a joyful noise. What's a noise? Is a noise a skillful song? So there's spectrums here. So what are we to do as New Testament worshipers? What does it mean when we are called to sing skillfully? And I would put before you that what that means is we ought to do what we can to be the best singers in song that we can be. Not every one of us, or in this probably none of us, are operatically trained, classically trained musicians. That is not what we're called to do. It's not an absolute standard. If you can't sing here, you shouldn't sing at all. But we all ought to try to better ourselves and to study when we can what it means to sing. And that's going to look different for different people. But so what we're going to go through today is some very basic, little bit of music theory, which is a scary term. I just mean by that, what are the values of notes? What are the time values of notes? How can you, especially in family worship, how can you open the Psalter and look at a tune, maybe one that you've never even seen before, and how can you lead your family in worship and start to become more familiar with the Psalter? So I've broken this down into 4 points. They're neither catchy nor alliterated, but we're going to talk about just a little bit more about the role of the precentor and the role of all of you as singers in the congregation. And then I'll talk a little bit about music theory, and then spend a little bit more time focusing on how you can apply those things to family worship. And then finally, we'll spend just a little bit of time on singing parts for anyone who wants to try to start to learn some of the other harmonies that are presented in the Psalter. So first, a little bit about precenting. What is the role of the precentor? I can tell you, but keep everyone on rhythm. Anything else? Yes, Becky?
Start everyone off
Start everyone off with the proper tune to lead, right? The precentor is a musical leader. The precentor is not a performer. I'm not before you performing. I'm leading the congregation in song. What is the primary role then of the congregation with respect to the precentor? To follow. Very good. Right, and that's how we can, as a congregation, sing skillfully. Somebody sets the pace, sets the tune, sets the note that we start on, and everyone else follows that lead so that we can all sing together. So I'm up here, right, waving my arms around. Does anybody know what that means? What am I doing with my arm when it's going up and around? Allison? Keeping the rhythm, right? So I'm showing the different beats of music, and we'll talk about that a little bit more specifically at my next point, but I'm keeping the beats of music. So there are two things that you can do to follow the precentor, and it's using two different senses, right? We've got 5 senses, so what are the 2 senses primarily that you should use when singing? Julia, what's one? Eyes, and what's the other one? Sammy? Ears. Both of those things, right? So you need to be able to see the precentor so you can understand how fast we're going, when's the next beat, when's the beginning of a measure, especially if you start to maybe get lost, you didn't know a word, or you were focused on a phrase and, where are we? You can follow the precentor and kind of get back to where we are. So you need to be able to hear me, but you also need to be able to see me. Now, how do you do that when you're also trying to read the words and the notes that are printed in the Psalter, right? I mean, any ideas? How can you both watch me and watch the words in your Psalter? Yeah. Yep, that's a good way. I didn't actually grab a Psalter. All right, pretend you're at the doctor's office, right, and he's showing you the different, is it A or B? So which do you think is better? To sing like this, or maybe to sing like this? Like that, right? And I can kind of out of my periphery, if Nate were in the back and he was starting to try to flag me down, I'd be able to see him if I'm looking at my Psalter holding it up. Holding your Psalter up does another thing. Musically speaking, it straightens and lengthens your whole chest cavity and what musicians call your column of air, right? If you're kind of scrunched over like this, it's hard to really get a nice full breath of air to get a nice full volume of supported sound. So the best way to do that musically is to have a good posture anyway. So keeping your Psalter up is going to accomplish 2 things. You're going to be able to keep an eye on me and see what my hands are doing and follow me along, but you're also going to have a much better sound as a singer because you've straightened out your column of air, and that's just, if you think of your body as a musical instrument, that's the best shape that you can give your musical instrument to be able to produce a good sound. So I think that's all I really wanted to cover in there. Now, there are copies of a musical cheat sheet that went around. Does anybody not have one and need one? Because we're going to spend a little bit of time working through this next. Okay, so the way I've divided this up is sort of in 2 columns. So on the left side is what I'll call the note values. So, where a note falls on the staff gives it a certain value, and what I mean by that is a certain pitch. Okay, so a C is going to have a different pitch, a different sound than a G. And an E will have a different sound than a B flat, okay? So what's on the left is hopefully going to be useful to you as you're looking at the Psalter to identify what note is that. So when you look at a note on the page, what note is that? I happen to be open right now to 90B. Actually, if you all have Psalters, why don't we turn to 90B, only because I happen to be there. And while you're turning there, I think the place to start is a little bit down from the top. I have two different staffs of music shown. One says line notes, and one says space notes. So this is going to be the quickest way for you to look at a note that's printed on a staff and be able to tell me what that note was. So in 90B, the very first note, look at where that note is, what space it's on, and then look at these space notes on the page. Who can tell me what that note is? Allison. It's an A. What about the last note of the line on the word Lord? What is that note? It's in the third space. Anyone want to hazard a very interactive row? That's a C. Very good. Let's get a line note. What about the second to last note? So turn yet again to us, O. What's that top note on the word O? It's on the fourth line. What note is that, Sammy? D. Very good. Now, for two of those answers, they weren't entirely correct. Anybody know why? Yep, in the back. Key signature would modify those notes. The key signature is on the far left. You see they kind of look like funny little, almost looks like a lowercase letter B. Okay, and there's 4 of them. They're not random. Those are called flats. They're called accidentals. The one that looks like a lowercase b is a flat. Okay. What that does is it takes the note that's in that space or on that line, and it lowers it by half a step. What I mean by half a step is if you were looking on a piano, and actually you can look back at your cheat sheet, and there's kind of the third section down, there's 1 scale's worth of piano keys, white ones and black ones. Okay, a half step is the difference between a white key and its black key. So you can see, if we look at the very first note, okay, that was an A, but if you look at the key signature, there's a little flat symbol that's also on that second space. That means that anytime you see the note A, you need to think in your head, well, that's actually an A flat. So on your cheat sheet, if you're looking at this white key A, to play an A flat, you would actually have to play the black key that's a half step down from the white key. It's a half step lower than the white key. Any questions on that? Yep.
Are those B's always on only of those 4 lines?
So in not only those 4, but what happens, so if you look at, so if you turn 2 pages and we look at 91A, there's only one. There's only one of those, and it's on the 3rd line. So that's a B flat. Now if we go back to 90B, the first one of those is that 3rd line, and you kind of add to that. And that's just the way that music works. I won't spend too much time on that. Like you would never have a key signature that's only a D flat or that's only an A flat. Okay, you only get to an A flat once you've already had a B flat and an E flat, and then it's A flat, and then it's D flat. And you don't need to worry about that. What's important for you is to be able to recognize that I see a note that's on the staff, and the cheat sheet tells me that that note's an A, but then the key signature tells me that that's an A flat. With me so far? It's hard. There's a lot to music. It's a language. I mean, music is its own language. Becky.
Why are there four of those like flats? Does that mean that?
It's a reference to the key signature. So if I were to play something in the key of C, there are no sharps and flats in the key of C. You could play that on a piano and you could just bang out all those white notes and you'd have a normal sounding scale. But now if I play something in the key of F, if I were to just do that on the white notes, it would sound funny. It wouldn't sound like the right scale. So you would have to change one of those notes by a half step.
She may not recognize that each one of those is located in a place in order to modify different lines. You know what I mean?
So the note that's modified by something that's a flat, it's either the line or the space that the little hoop of the B is sitting on, right? There's a line that comes down and then there's a B. So wherever that's centered is the note that's adjusted. Now if you turn the page back one to 90A, now instead of flats, we have the other modifiers. Does anyone know what that modifier is called? Ruth? Sharps. Similar to the flat symbol, so if you take the center of that symbol, so it sort of looks like a pound, right? So if you take the very middle of that, the very middle square of that sharp symbol, wherever that square sits, that's the note that's adjusted by the sharp. And it does exactly the opposite that a flat does. Instead of making the note flatter, it makes it sharp by exactly a half step. So if you're looking at your white key, so let's look at, okay, Lord, thou hast been our dwelling. So the note that dwelling begins on, it's located on the third space, which is a C, but that C needs to be sharpened because the key signature has one of those sharp symbols on the note C. So I would have to then play a C sharp, not a C. So you'd look at your C on the piano and you could go up to the black key. So sharps go up a half step and flats go down a half step. 90A. Okay. There, and then I'll come back. Okay, go ahead.
So whenever I see the flats and the sharps at the beginning of the stanza, but then like if we're looking at 90A, looking in that first stanza in the word generations, when we get to that, then there's also a separate sharp for that note. So I just was always under the assumption that you didn't sing flat or sharp unless it was right in front of that note. But you're saying that even if it's at the beginning, it's with all of those notes going that line.
Correct. So what's the difference then?
The only note that would be a sharp.
In that measure.
Okay.
In that measure. Can anyone define for me what a measure of music is? Or how is it notated, Julia? Well, that tells you that is the definition of a measure. How do you know when you're looking at a page where a measure starts and where a measure stops? Yep, in the back. A vertical line. So when you see actually this is a great example. So at the end of that first phrase, in generations all, the alto part, and we'll talk about those when we get to parts, but the alto part goes from a C to a D sharp, and then there's another printed D. Because that D occurs in the same measure that there was a sharp, that second D will still be a D sharp. You don't have to write D sharp again. But then if you ever see a D again, which you do down on the next line, before thou, that D is now just a regular old D, because it's in a different measure than where that sharp symbol was. So you got to kind of remember as you're going through, okay, it was sharp that time, but I don't see a sharp symbol in this measure, so now it's a normal one this time around. Yep.
So is that if you play the same note, like it's a sharp or a D sharp, and it's a D sharp after that, you don't have to do it. Is that if the note repeats or if the measure, if it's a new measure?
if it's the same, if the note repeats. So if it's the same note in that same measure. It doesn't even have to be immediately after, but as soon as it's a different measure, the writer, if he wants a D sharp again, would have to say D sharp again. Every measure sort of resets back to the default key signature, which is what's on the left side of the staff of music. With me so far? Any other questions? Yep.
If the C flat and the D sharp are the same, then how do we choose which one to use?
I don't know if I have a good answer for you that. I think generally speaking, if you're working in a key signature that contains sharps, the preference would be to use sharps. Psalter music is never going to get this complex, but if you were ever to pull up like a Rachmaninoff piano concerto or something like that, there's going to be places where there's runs of notes where it ascends like half step at a time, and sometimes it just makes more sense from a notation standpoint to use a flat instead of a sharp. That way you don't have like the same note written 3 times, like D flat, D natural. You'd actually have to use a different symbol to clarify that it's no longer sharp, and then make that flat. Like that's 3 modified symbols in a row. So the writer would probably, start with like a C sharp instead of a D flat, just to minimize how many times he's having to change it. But generally speaking, if the key signature is in sharp, you're usually going to see sharps throughout. And if the key signature is in flat, you'll usually see flats throughout. Yep. The cancellation in the last line of which? Of what? Before thou ever. Oh, okay, I didn't know there was one in here. Okay, so what that means, that symbol, it looks like a sharp symbol, but it's not, because it doesn't quite continue the full little tic-tac-toe grid. Okay, that means that it is a natural note, which means it's neither sharp nor flat. Those need to be used because that G, if you don't put that symbol there, and you look at the key signature, that G should have been a sharp. But the writer didn't want it to be a G sharp, he wanted it to be a G natural. So you have to actually write in the symbol to show that it's sort of a deviation from the standard key signature. And we'll talk about octaves in a minute, because that one's also a little bit confusing. Yep. Actually, I'll talk about octaves now. So on your cheat sheet, so there's a piano on the top, and then there's these 2 stabs of notes. If you start right in the middle, on the top line, it starts with a C, which is sort of a first line under the staff, and it ends on a C, which is in the 3rd space. That represents 1 octave. And you can continue up from there, or you can continue down from there, and it becomes a bit of a math problem. You know that D comes after C, so even though you don't necessarily see the note D here, the next one would be a D, and the one after that would be an E, and the one after that would be an F. So you can do a little bit of, accounting, if you want to call it, in your mind as you continue to write notes that are higher, or you continue to write notes that are lower. But notes only exist A through G. Once you get to G, the next note up is an A again, and that A is an octave difference from the previous A. It's sort of like it's the same note, but it's twice as high. It's kind of a way to think about it. The reason it's important to recognize that is because the key signature is only going to notate 1 time. So if we look at the key signature of 90A, the very first sharp symbol is on the very top line of the staff. What note is that? What's the top line of the staff? G is the space above it. It's an F. So the top line is an F. What is the first space on the staff? Not the first line, what's the first space on the staff? Julia? F, also an F. So as the psalm begins, Lord, thou hast, that word hast is sung on the note F. That F is supposed to be sharp. And you know that because the key signature marks the F, which is actually an octave higher, as sharp. But every F, it doesn't matter which octave it is. So if it's a bass F in the bass line, or if it's a tenor F, or an alto F, or a soprano F, all of those Fs, unless otherwise noted with that natural symbol, are going to be sharp. A lot to keep track of. That's why you have cheat sheets. With me so far? Is that making sense? Okay. All right, I think that's all we'll cover for note values. We'll sort of come back to this, but now I want to talk about the time values of notes. So that's going to be everything that's on the right side of your cheat sheet. This starts to get into now, when I'm doing this, my arms are giving you one beat at a time. Generally speaking, one beat is one quarter note. There are exceptions to that. But generally speaking, one beat is one quarter note. So in Psalm 90, I'll say why in a minute, but in Psalm 90, it's in 3, so it sort of feels like a waltz, like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, it's sort of a waltz type of a meter. So I'm going to say downbeat, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And as you're counting the notes, every one of these beats is a quarter note, and there are 3 of them in a measure until I get to the next measure. So let's look at the actual psalm. So the first note is actually a quarter note. Okay, so you can look at your table. So the note that is filled in and it has a stem with nothing attached to it, that is a quarter note. And that's one beat. The next note looks similar, except that it's not filled in. So we call that a half note. It has 2 beats. One half note is the same as 2 quarter notes. And that's what this tree is supposed to show you. You start with one whole note at the very top, which is just an oval with nothing in it. Okay, that's a whole note. Half of a whole note is a circle with nothing in it, but it also has a stem. Okay, 2 of those are the same as one whole note as far as how long of a note it is. Okay, and then it's a quarter note after that, and an eighth note after that. There are such things as 16th notes and 32nd notes and 64th notes. You won't see all of those in the Psalter. That's back in Rachmaninoff land, okay, when he's just filling in the page with piano notes. So when I'm giving you a beat, those are almost always quarter notes. So in the psalm, we start with a quarter note, and then we have a half note, so that would take this and this. Okay, that's 2 beats. So, Lord, thou hast been our dwell. So you can count the notes off in your head as I'm moving my arms. Now in that third measure, there are 2 eighth notes. You have to sing both of those 2 eighth notes in the time that it takes me to get from here to here. Okay, so Lord, thou hast been our dwell. And you would sing 2 notes of music, okay, on those eighth notes in the time of one beat with my hand. Does that make sense? So this aspect of music is like one big math problem, and I'm sure everybody in here loves math. Or maybe it's an accounting problem. But you can add them all up in your head. And so as you're practicing at home, if it seems like you're a little bit off, you probably counted out one of the notes wrong. Maybe you only counted that as like, you could say, like, Lord, thou hast been our, it just doesn't feel right. You probably counted something wrong. And then you could go back and look at it and it's like, wait a minute, okay. Oh, that should have had 2 beats. And you can kind of get yourself back on track a little bit that way. And as far as what the notes look like, so, the whole note, it's just a circle without the line. Half note is a circle with a line. Quarter note is a circle that's filled in with a line. And then everything shorter than that, they just start to add these little flags. So an eighth note looks like a quarter note, but it's got 1 little flag. A 16th looks like a quarter note, but it's got 2 little flags. And you'll notice that sometimes those flags between 2 notes are connected, and sometimes they are not connected. And actually, we sang a psalm today that had both. Not that one. So 68, did we sing 68? 86. Turn to 86. That doesn't look right. No, that is right. Okay. 86A. And this is just a very brief differentiation. So you'll notice that the psalm begins with 2 eighth notes, and their little flags are connected. But then when you go to the third measure, where it says, answer Jehovah, there are 2 eighth notes, but they're just freestanding. They're not connected. When notated correctly, what that means is that if they're connected, it means that you're only singing 1 syllable on those 2 notes combined. So you can see at the beginning, attend. So you say, attend. So you'd sing both of those notes on that syllable at. As opposed to, in the third measure, it's the second half of answer and then the first syllable of Jehovah. Each of those syllables gets its own note. And that's notated by the presence or the lack of those notes being connected. Also, the way that you put words to music, usually the writers are pretty good about the syllable being directly underneath the note that it's supposed to go with. But when in doubt, look at whether the notes are connected or not, and that'll help you know if there's supposed to be a syllable on each note or if the syllable is sort of slurred through both notes. Does that distinction make sense to everybody? Okay. And then the last thing on timing is the time signature. The time signature is indicated by the 2 numbers that appear just after the key signature. And this can get a little bit confusing. Actually, it can get a lot confusing. I'll try to make this as simple as I can. The top number is the number of beats in a measure. Okay, so 86A is in 3, so it's 1, 2, 3. There's 3 beats in each measure. Where it gets a little confusing is the bottom number. You almost have to think in your head of that number being a fraction. So ignore the 3 for a minute and just think 1/4. So the note, which has a value of 1/4, which is a quarter, is the note that you're counting the number of beats in the measure. So 3/4 means that there are 3 beats in the measure, and the quarter note, the note having a value of 1/4, is the note that gets a beat. Make sense? Is that clear? Okay, turn the page to 86B. That has a time signature of 2/2. That means there are 2 beats in a measure. So if I'm presenting this, I'll say 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and the note having a value of 1/2 gets 1 beat. So which note, look at your cheat sheet, which note has a value of 1/2? Julia? The half note. Now the way this is written on your cheat sheet is that it has 2 beats, but that's assuming that a quarter note has 1 beat. So in this psalm, it's actually the half note that gets 1 beat. Now what's the difference between, so now if you look at this, actually I won't get into that, that just makes it confusing. So things are written in 2/2 when they're supposed to be a little quicker. Okay, so if I were to present this in 4, it would kind of drag on, Thy way, teach me, Lord, I will. And it would just kind of be a little bit slow. So when you write it in 2, Thy way, teach me, Lord, I will walk. So it kind of has a little bit of a quicker feel to it, okay? And that's what doing it in 2/2 allows you to do. But as far as trying to figure out how many beats are in a measure, the top number is how many beats, and the bottom number, and think of there being a 1 over that number, that's the value of the note that gets 1 beat. Julia. 6/8. I was hoping we wouldn't get to 6/8. 6/8 really feels like 2. And when I present 6/8, I do it in 2. What that means, mathematically, is that there are 6 beats in a measure, and that the 1/8 note gets 1 beat. I'm not going to go like this, right? I'm going to get tired, and you're going to have no idea what I'm doing. So what I do is most of them feel like 2. So anyone know of a good, Julie, do you know of a good 6/8 one? Huh? 18K. All right, let's all turn to 18K. Nice. Okay, this one's a fun one anyway. So, and if I did this, trying to wave my hand 6 times, this would absolutely crawl. 8th notes are pretty quick. Notes tend to kind of have, 8th notes are always going to be a little bit quick. And so the way that writers write music, if they want something to sort of have a quick feel to it, they're going to write them with very short valued notes, like 8th notes or 16th notes. Whereas if you want something to be much slower, generally you're using something like half notes or whole notes. Now something that's written in 2/2 is a little bit of a exception to that. So 18K, I would say, I chased and overtook my enemies. Okay, I'm doing it in 2. I'm not going to do, I chased and overtook my enemies. Like it's just, my arm's all over the place. And it would actually, what would end up happening is it would slow down because I can't keep my arm moving that fast the whole time. And it would end up just absolutely dragging. So 6/8, that's a good question. 6/8, I generally do in 2. So what that means is when it comes to time signatures, if you do nothing else, really understand the difference between 3 beats in a measure and everything else. You can do 4/4 in 2. You can do 2/2 in 4. Okay, the difference between 4 and 2 is really just how many times am I doing this before I give myself a downbeat. But 3, you really need to know the difference of 3. That's that waltz type of a feel. You can't do something that's written in 2 in 3. It just, every other measure, you just feel like you're singing the downbeat on the wrong beat. It wouldn't make sense. So that's really the key to understand is the difference between 3 and everything else. Everything else you do in 2 or 4. Okay. Let's move on. My watch isn't working. I don't actually know what time it is. 1:40, okay. Okay, and I think we'll get through the rest of my notes a little quicker. So now I want to focus on sort of a family worship setting. So maybe you're not particularly musical, or maybe you're new to the Psalter, or maybe it's a little bit of both. And so you're doing family worship, and you get to a psalm, and you either don't know it, or maybe you're not sure how to get to know it. You're not sure what note to start on. So how do you start to sort through some of these things? So first of all, where is the melody? Can anybody tell me where is the melody? How do you find the melody? What is the tune? There's lots of notes here on this page. What is the tune, Eric? The top one. It's always the top notes. Let's turn to 22I. I like the way this is notated. We all know the tune for 22I very well. But what I do want to point out, so the melody is always the top notes. And even then, sometimes if the notes get kind of close together, the other way you can tell is look at the very end of the top line where it says shall turn themselves. On the word turn and them, you'll notice that some of the notes the stem shoots upward, and on some of the notes the stem shoots down. So the melody is always the top notes, but even then, when in doubt, the melody is the one that has the stems facing up if there are two different stem directions. I don't think it ever matters in the Psalter. I don't think the alto ever goes above soprano. But if it ever did, the way that it would be notated is the alto's notes would have a stem facing down, and the sopranos would have a stem facing up. But generally speaking, it's the top notes. So if you're trying to find the melody, it's the top notes. If you're trying to find what the notes sound like, everyone ought to have either their own pitch pipe. This one hasn't been used in a while. Ooh. Or a pitch pipe app. I know Apple has one, right? You've got Apples, right? Android has one. So you can just search the App Store for pitch pipe app, and you'll probably get a few options. And then what you can use is your cheat sheet and everything you know now about the values of notes and the sharps and flats. And so you can look at the page and see, okay, that's an E, so I'm on 22I, so that's an E, and there's a flat up there, so that's an E flat. So I find on my pitch pipe where it has an E flat, then I play that, and then I would know that's my starting note. You can even sort of figure out what the tune is by playing some of these notes. So that was an E flat, the next note's an A flat, so You probably all know the tune now if you didn't already, right? And you can just continue it on. So that would be a great way to start a song. You now know, with all expertise, what the note values are, and pick up your pitch pipe, and it'll have written right on it. In fact, this one, if you can make it out, it even it has the name of the note, but it also shows the note on the staff. It doesn't on the black side. So if you've got one of these, I mean, there's a few different ways that you can match this to what's on your Psalter. The app is similar, Androids or Apples. So that's one way you could start. The other way, which I will now show, is at psalter.org. And I should mention, psalter.org is a whopping $9 a year to subscribe. So your homework, your only piece of homework is tomorrow morning, instead of picking up that $9 Frappa latte or whatever they got at Starbucks, instead of buying your morning coffee tomorrow morning, subscribe to psalter.org for the year, okay, and then you can use this tool. Oh good. So you'll see there's the blue Psalter and there's the red Psalter. So whichever Psalter you're using, you can open it up. And then you can go to 22I. And then you just click on the song and it'll start playing. I don't know if the sound's going to come through. Let's try this. Cool. So if you didn't know it by looking at it, you can go to psalter.org and now you can hear the tune. Now the one thing I will say, that is 4-part harmony. If you have trouble picking out what the melody is from that, which would be understandable, there's 4 different notes playing at the same time. Your other option, and you have to use the blue Psalter portion of psalter.org for this. But the blue Psalter, it's a little bit newer. They've kind of expanded their tools with it a little bit. But the blue Psalter allows you to turn on and shut off individual voices. 22I in the blue is 22, do you remember? There it is, 22E. So I can open up this parts, and then I can say exclusive, and then click on the S for soprano. And now when I play it, it's extremely slow, but it's only the melody now. So if you're having a hard time picking out the melody from the other harmonies when you use the red Psalter version, you can try to use the blue Psalter version. You have to kind of hope that it's the same tune. It might take you a minute to find the same tune. And now if you were trying to learn parts, this is where you can now play around with the different voices. I could even shut off the soprano. This is now just the alto part. Okay, I can turn that off and do tenor. Or I can just do bass. Now, when we're talking about parts, remember, singing part, there is certainly a beauty to harmony and to part singing. My only caution would be, don't allow your effort to try to learn parts and sing parts take away from your worship. If you've never sung parts before, I would say that, during worship, when we turn to a psalm, it's probably not the time you should start learning, right? We are here to worship, and when we're gathered in the Lord's house, that skillful singing, learning a part on the spot. Maybe you have someone standing right next to you who is singing a part, and maybe that's all you can hear. You can hear him louder than the presenter. Maybe you have to follow that part. That's okay. But if you're using worship as that's the first time I'm ever going to try to harmonize, just be careful. Just keep in mind why you're worshiping and why you're singing and why you're trying to learn parts. My recommendation would be it would be better to learn those parts on your own time, and when you become a little bit more familiar with that. Than sing during worship. And that's a very beautiful thing, especially since we sing a cappella. To hear all of those different voices singing together, but all the different parts, it's really a beautiful thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that you sound, or you're on, your part. Or even people who have never sang parts.
So you,
or like Adam, he doesn't really know if he's a tenor or a bass if he's never learned. So to know, I'm a tenor, this is what tenor sounds like.
yeah.
Bass sounds like.
So to that I would say two things. One, the way the Psalter is written, whether you're an alto or a soprano, I think you'd be hard-pressed to get to a psalm that you just, I'm an alto and I just can't sing that high. Some of the red ones especially, they do go quite high. But generally speaking, whether you're an alto or a soprano, you can sing the melody line comfortably. And the reverse is true too. If you're a soprano, you can probably sing the alto. The alto doesn't go that low on most of them, I don't think. Sort of our default position as singers singing God's praises is to sing the melody. And if you can sing some of those other parts, that's wonderful. If you want to learn some of those other parts and you're trying, are you looking for names? If I know that maybe Julie Maurer is singing alto.
Yeah, she just started singing alto because she heard too much soprano.
Mm.
So just to have that, there's 10 sopranos, why don't we take 5 of you, you sing alto, you guys are soprano. And then, to have more of that.
Yeah.
Saying that, beauty in the.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say, my opinion on that is you can't ever have too many sopranos. If we were all singing melody together, that's a beautiful thing too. And I don't think I would ever say I'm missing the alto or the tenor or the bass. Now, on some of these selections, like 119X is a very popular one during psalm sings. We could all sing melody on that, except when you get to that sort of chorusy part. If everyone's just singing melody, but the basses start, now we're all just kind of silent, and we're all going to start singing again at some point. But so some of them are written very specifically for four-part harmony. But that said, I don't know that those psalm selections are ever exclusive that way. Like 119X is copied by 119W, I believe. It's all the same word. So if you didn't have a group of people where all four parts are represented well, I wouldn't sing 119X, I'd sing W, which is a melody that everybody knows, and it's much easier to sing. But yeah, if you're trying to learn parts and you kind of want to, pick out certain voices in the congregation, I mean, that is another way to be able to learn. So if you know that Lydia sings alto from time to time, sit near her during worship, and you'll start to hear her and hear what that sounds like. A lot of music you pick up by ear. It's very difficult to just theorize it, and now I'm an expert on singing. You really need to hear it, and to hear it for a long time to become, proficient at singing harmonies and things like that. But good question. Yeah.
I have a question too. With looking at 22I, I only have a little piano experience, so I just wonder, why do they put the flat notes, I guess, would be in the next octave, rather than, so if you look at where the E is in the melody, for me, I have to look at that next octave and then, count up the notes to find,
Mm-hmm.
it's the E flat. You know what I mean? Why don't we put it in the line where the actual...
Yeah, no, I hear you there, and I was just griping to Julia about this the other day too. You have to remember, music is its own language. Music, the way that we use music in our psalters, it was not created for the psalter. The psalter predates, it's the Bible. The psalter has been there, and it's been sung in different ways in history. The Israelites of old did not sing the tune 22I that we have. That tune did not come around until Haydn wrote the tune in his creation oratory. So just the way that music is notated, to someone like Julia, who is an accomplished pianist, she sees the time signature and she just sees four flats and she immediately knows what key that's in. If we started playing games where, it starts on the first line E flat, so how about instead of writing that E flat up there, we write it down there? Now that throws someone like Julia off because she's used to seeing, what those four flats look like, and now it looks like something different, and now she's kind of hesitate. So there's a way that music is written, and sometimes it caters well to the kind of singing that we use it for in church, and sometimes it doesn't. So this is a case where it doesn't. Yeah, we're starting on a first line E flat, but we didn't know that was an E flat without having gone an octave above and seeing that that's a flat, so now the octave below we know is a flat too.
So is it catered in this case, or typically in music, more for an instrument, if somebody was playing it on an instrument, like on a piano, that's how they notate it, rather than for people that are just singing on how that...
Yeah, I don't even know. It's just how it's always been, and then everyone uses it. If you were to talk to a flute player, they laugh at you because they say, well, yeah, that's great that those are written on the staff. All of my notes are 16 leisure lines above the staff. That's just how flute players play music. I can't understand flute music because there's so many leisure line counting before you get up to the notes that they play. So that's just the way that music was standardized, and everybody uses it that way. So when you learn music, that's just the way that you have to learn it, unfortunately. I would love to rewrite the Psalter and just put things where they belong so we can understand it better, but that would throw the rest of the singing world off, and that would kind of put us out there more than we already are. Yes, that's right. That's right. Okay, I know we're getting close to time, but a couple more things. So I talked about the pitch pipe or the pitch pipe app. If you have a piano, you can use the cheat sheet, which shows the notes on a piano. So if you're trying to look at, what's my starting note, if you have a piano or a keyboard, that's another way that you can start is by using those notes. And a couple quick notes. I don't know if this is true in the blue Psalter, but in the red Psalter, let's go to 27, which is just a few pages over from I. So 27a. I want to point something out here. So the tune for 27a is da 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 da. I can use that tune for all of the selections of 27. Well, I should say actually for A through C. 27 starts over again at D, and then it uses a completely different set of tunes. But if you ever get to a psalm selection and you just can't figure out the tune, or you have, but it's a weird tune and you just can't, it just doesn't stick. You have two options. One is to go to a different selection of that psalm because it should be metered the same. So you can use the tune for 27a for either A, B, or C. That's the easiest route and the nicest route, quite frankly, because it makes singing the entirety of a psalm better or easier. You don't have to skip selections just because you can't figure out the tune. So that's the easier option. The slightly more difficult option is to look underneath the psalm heading on the inside of the binding. There's the name of the tune, and then that's the meter. So for 27a, that's common meter, which as the name implies is the most common meter in the Psalter. And that's the same meter that like Amazing Grace is written to. Okay, so there's a lot of psalms in the Psalter that you can sing because they're written in common meter. If it's something that's a little bit more complex, like go to 31G, I just flipped there. The name of the tune is Saints Praise. I'm doing this like you can read these words too, but so the tune name is Saints Praise, and that's in the meter 76.76.D. Remember that? So what do you do with that? Okay, that one you can take in the very back of the Psalter. There's a bunch of indices, and starting on page 449 is the metrical index of tunes. So you can go and find in there 7676D. So let's find that. They're generally in numeric order after you get past all like the common meters and all that. So 7676D. So it's right in the middle column near the bottom on page 450. And that'll give you every selection in the Psalter that is written with that meter. So if you can't figure that tune out, you could go to one of these other ones and flip through those and find one whose tune you know, and then you can sing these words from 31G to that tune. Okay, so that's the second way, if you really can't figure a tune out. The third way, so if you can't use another selection in the psalm, and you're just not making heads or tails of any other tune in the Psalter, your third option is to give me a call or send me an email, and I'm happy to make a quick recording for you. It's very easy, and I'm happy to do that for anybody. You'll have to hear my voice, which is not great, but at least you'll hear the melody then, if you really can't figure it out any other way. So there's that option too. So that's it, I say. It's a lot. Music is a lot. I've been in music my whole life. I never really did music training per se, but I've been in music my whole life, and it's easy for me to take for granted how difficult music really is. So don't be discouraged. If you get through the Psalter and you just get to a selection and you're just not getting the tune, and everyone else seems to know it, why don't I know it? Music is difficult. It is its own language. Learning languages is difficult. Maybe it's easier for some, but learning languages is difficult. So it is a difficult thing. So don't be discouraged. And I am happy and willing to help anybody when you get stuck. So that's all I had to cover. I can take any other questions, Adam?
Salter.org, the premium features is $9, but if you didn't want the premium features, then you can still do
Oh, so you could still get your Frappuccino in the morning. For anyone who didn't hear what Adam said, so Psalter.org, if you don't subscribe to it, you can still see the Psalms, you just don't get... Oh, so you can still play it, okay. You just don't get all the features, okay. Okay, yeah, Nate.
There's also another website called psalmsung.org.
Psalms sung,
Psalmsung.org.
okay.
It has a variety of psalters. It has the blue psalter, the red psalter, the book of Psalms of David and Peter. It has a variety of them, and they're recorded. They're recordings of congregations.
Okay, that's good to know. The psalmssung.org?
Yeah.
.org. Anything else? We could practice. Does anyone have one they want to? What do you mean by practice? Does that mean you want to come up here and lead us all in? Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to close in a psalm. Why don't we close in a psalm? Does anyone have Madeline? What? 119X. Let's put all of our new musical expertise to work here. 119X. Okay, since we're going to do 119X, I do have to cover one thing real quick. So I just told you about 5 minutes ago that the melody is always the top notes. That is until you get to 119X. 119X, the melody, you can see it written there in parentheses, the melody is actually the top notes of the bass clef, which is the tenor part. So the melody, which I will sing when I'm presenting, is found in the tenor part. So if you're trying to follow the melody and you're trying to follow me and match up what I'm doing to notes, just know that I'm singing the top notes of the bass clef, not the top notes of the treble clef. Okay. But if you would like to sing parts and you know how to sing parts, the soprano would still be where it usually is. It's the top notes of the treble clef and so on. All right. 119. Great idea. Everyone stand and make your air columns nice and tall. Maybe I'll go up a step here. Yeah, keep those psalters nice and right in front of you so you can see me and hear me. Da, 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 da. Before thee let my cry come near, O Lord, true to thy word, teach me. Before thee let my pleading come true to thy in heaven, we thank you again for this day. We thank you for this time of singing and of learning about music and how your praises have been put to song. We thank you that we have songs and tunes that we can learn and that we can sing together, to sing your praises together. May these things not be a distraction to us, and give us the ability to learn these tunes and learn the music and be able to play skillfully with our hearts, even as the psalmist played skillfully on the harp. And we ask now that you would go with us throughout this afternoon and in the coming week. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.